The side of the road is no place to be fighting the police, even if they'd made a mistake. Tom, we were looking at a video out there of a guy who matched the description of somebody who was seen breaking into cars. Police officer wanted to stop, pat him down, do his investigation. The guy appears to, I don't know, to my eyes, didn't resist too hard, but was resisting, was not following instructions. The cop took him down pretty hard, body slammed him to the ground, and it sounds like the police officer got fired for using too much force. But the question that is rolling around is, what should you do in that situation where maybe the cop is wrong, and you know the cop is wrong, but the cop doesn't know he's wrong yet? And me as a retired officer, I want to say, please don't fight with me on the side of the road. I've got to win that fight. And if I'm not going to win that fight, if someone's going to kick my butt, I'm calling my friends. So I'm going to tell people not to fight the cops and try to have their day in court.
Yep.
Wow,
yeah.
That was simple.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, so the cops have a long history of being able to use escalating levels of force to make sure that they don't lose the fight. That's code for if you somehow start to win the wrestling match, it turns into a taser match. If you somehow win the taser match, it's going to guns, right? And none of that is good. And let's be clear, none of that is fair. If you're genuinely being misidentified, you didn't do anything, then this is a really bad day for you. And frankly, it's a bad day for the officer too, who probably doesn't want to make that mistake and maybe just stumbled into that mistake through no fault of their own. They were given a description that looks exactly like you, right? And best case scenario, that's what it is.
And in this case, they probably got, and this is what we say all the time about dispatchers, they probably got dispatched to a scene, guy in a dark colored hoodie, white male, long hair. Go out and find him. This cop finds somebody who looks like him and says, hey, come over here. I need to detain you. I need to figure out what's going on and find out who you are and figure out what's going on. This guy just flat out says, no, I'm not going to cooperate. And at that point, the cop used force. And as I watched the video, that body slam, I don't know, in my eyes, probably too much force for putting that guy down.
Definitely too much force.
Yeah, you can direct someone to the ground and decentralize this person without doing what that cop did. But the cop felt at the time he needed to do that. I don't know if he's just asserting his authority or whatever. We can hash out whether or not good cop or bad cop at a different time. The person who the officer was making contact with, and in this case, I'll just say the subject because it's not even a suspect, it's just a subject. That person, I'm going to ask, please just cooperate with this. It'll be over in a few minutes. And if the cop does something seriously wrong on that stop, you're going to have an actionable case. You'll be able to sue that police department in all likelihood.
I think your fastest way out of that situation, which you did not choose, if you were the good guy, did genuinely nothing wrong and just wrong place, wrong time, misidentified, your fastest way out of that situation is cooperation. And what I mean by that is, sure, if you want to be detained here, what do you need, officer, right? That's what I would do. If you want to play the I'm not being detained, I'm a sovereign citizen traveling, I'm a traveler and all that kind of stuff, that's code for you're in for a long day. And maybe you wind up getting a check out of it if the cop misplays this, right? But at the end of the day, if your goal is I just want to get out of this as quickly as possible, then cooperating with what's going on will be the fastest route there. I'm not suggesting you should or have to or ought to waive your Fifth Amendment rights, waive all those rights, right? Because we know that the right to silence, the U.S. Supreme Court has said multiple times, the right to silence is there to protect the innocent from ambiguous situations. And if you've got cops pulling you over and asking to search you and detain you and all this other kind of stuff, that is, at a minimum, an ambiguous situation. But you can reserve your right to silence, you can reserve your right to an attorney, you cannot consent to any searches, but if the cops want to detain you, don't run. And he didn't appear to run here at all, but don't run. If they're gonna start ripping through your backpack, don't fight them over it, right? Because even if an officer has a warrant that's absolutely illegal for whatever reason or other, right? It turns out to be absolutely illegal down the road in court. If you resist that warrant, you can be prosecuted and sent to jail for resisting, right? So at the end of the day, what I tell people is, look, feel free to raise your rights. If you want to cooperate and make it go faster for you, hopefully, then great, okay? But don't resist them. Don't be a jackass. Don't do any of those sorts of things, because it's just going to end up worse for you at the end of the day.
And I want to make it really clear to everybody who's watching that I personally was never one of those cops who is going off the deep end on stuff like this. I want people to maintain their rights. It's part of why I became a police officer, is to protect people and protect their rights. In this case, that officer had reasonable suspicion to at least make contact. He got a report that a person who matched this description was very likely committing a crime, so that cop was investigating. The person on the other end of that investigation does not have to give up their rights, and they don't have to speak. They don't, they have a right against illegal or unreasonable search and seizure and things like that. But to be cooperative during that time really sets everything up to make sure that the night doesn't go bad. And the guy didn't look like he was resisting that hard. I mean, it didn't look like it was spinning out of control into a fight. But some of those cases have. And in that case, it spins out of control into a fight. The cop starts losing the fight and then decides to use deadly force. Now, all you're hearing in the news is this guy got killed for nothing. He wasn't doing anything. And I have always said, well, wait a minute. He was doing something. He was fighting, physically fighting with the police officer, trying to get a physical advantage on that police officer. Yeah, maybe the cop made a mistake. People make mistakes. Let him make that mistake, and then the stop ends in 10 minutes instead of ends with someone dead and carrying on for years down the road as the investigation and things follow.
We have a couple fundamental problems, and I just want to focus on one of them, and I think we're going to agree on it. Officers are, when they're going through the academy, when they're on the force, when they're in the department, whatever, you guys all, for 100% legitimate and understandable reasons, you guys are trained on the extreme scenarios. What happens if, hey, you pulled someone for speeding, they're making furtive movements, you can't really see, and all of a sudden they come up with a gun and start shooting at you point blank, right? So good officers have to be taking all this into account, because they have to be ready for that 1 in a million, because they don't know if that day is today for them. So they got that, where they have to be ready for the extreme. They don't know who they're dealing with until everything's done and it's in the rearview mirror, right? But on the other hand, of course, we've got a situation where officers we don't live in a military state, and we expect our police to comport themselves in a peaceable, civil manner. And the problem is we've got segments of our society that, I'm not going to say, well, let's just say that they force officers to be sometimes much closer to that edge than officers or citizens alike would prefer for them to be, because they don't know what's going to happen. Because there are some people who, due to drugs, due to mental illness, due to whatever it is, just being bad guys, right? They are willing and ready to commit heinous acts of violence on police, on other citizens and civilians at the drop of a hat with no notice. And I think that because law enforcement gets amped up on that, that's the reason why you see cops sometimes, not every time like this, but sometimes seemingly have these responses where we're just looking at, like in this video, it's like, well, it seemed like a pretty steep escalation out of nowhere. I mean, do you feel like I'm getting anything wrong there?
No, not particularly, and I just credit some very good early advice that I have. I don't want to be here telling war stories or anything like that, but very early on when I started, I did a ride-along in a larger Wisconsin city with a lieutenant who has now since retired, but it was wonderful to watch. We got dispatched to a suspicious person complaint of a guy walking down the street shouting. Okay, I mean, he wasn't shouting really loudly when we saw him, but guy walking down the street talking to himself shouting. We pulled up. This lieutenant said, "Hey buddy, can you come over here? I want to talk to you." The guy says, "F you, nope," kept walking down the sidewalk. And the lieutenant pulled back into traffic and started driving away. And I was like, "Are we gonna go talk to this guy?" He's like, "Walking down the sidewalk's not a crime. Talking to himself, even talking loud, not a crime. We gotta let him go." And gave me a long explanation about how that works. And I know that there are other cops out there who would want to stop and try to get that guy's ID and see what's going on and stuff like that. But there's a lot more good cops who just know that that's not a crime and let him go. In the case of what we saw in this video, the cop was actually investigating a crime. He went over the line on how he took this guy down, but he was actually investigating a report of a crime, which probably could have been cleared up in just minutes. Yep, I'm checking you out. I'm going to look in this bag. If there's nothing in the bag, or if there is something in the bag, or if the search is illegal, we'll find that out later. Nobody has to get their head slammed into the cement.
Right. No, absolutely. And yeah, that's where you as the citizen have to straddle that line of, what am I going to be today? Am I going to be the non-compliant person? And I don't mean non-compliant in the sense of I'm raising my rights, because I do view that as compliance. It's just a different form of compliance, right? And when I see non-compliant, I mean somebody who's rude, disrespectful, they're trying to run away. That's what I mean by non-compliance. Then you've got the person who's entirely cooperative, the person who it's like, yep, I'll tell you anything you want. Here's my bag, look inside of it, do whatever you need to do, right? That's the person who, if they've been misidentified, is going to go home the soonest, I would imagine. Or you get the person who's going to raise their rights and so forth, which they're acting within the law, but they just turned their 2-minute, 10-minute, 20-minute encounter into a Lord knows how long encounter / potentially overnight in jail, and how do we get a warrant to search this backpack? Or again, subject to whatever the circumstances may be. And I'm not trying to say that one or the other is better. I think that they're both viable options. I think that depending upon your circumstances, one might be better than the other. I'm sure the officer has their preference on which one do we prefer.
The vast majority of cops that I've known, interacted with, even heard about, we don't want to get in a fight.
Right.
We don't want to have that.
Well, I'm not even talking fights.
Yeah.
Right.
Or we don't want this detention, this roadside detention, to last any longer than it absolutely has to. Takes us away from doing other stuff out there. There might be some who are looking for a reason to yell at somebody or assert their authority, but I think that number is very, very small. And you know, my typical response was, now I got to do something about this. You know, when I saw something that was going on out there, because yeah, that's taking you off your patrol for a while, and you're right, you never know how it's going to turn out. We love it when people are cooperative, and if we made a mistake, great, we made a mistake. File a report, get us in trouble afterwards. Don't fight with us on the side of the road.
Absolutely, that is the wrong call through and through.
Thank you very much, Tom. Always love your insight. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Kevin.
Before I let you go, we have a secret gun giveaway going on. It's happening right now. It's absolutely free, but it does end really soon. So click the link in the description down below to see which brand new gun you could win.